ahead and do a few announcements as we, Gwen is getting online here and getting her system fired up. So again, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have attendees from all over the world joining. And of course, we are so very lucky to have Professor Joe Goldblatt with us today, one of the founders of ILEA and the first international president. We're going to go over a few announcements in case you didn't know, is Membership Rally Week. Of course, we can rally for membership every week. But this week, we are really putting focus on, if you're already an ILEA member, telling your story out on social media using our hashtag #WeAreILEA. You can change your profile picture over, and we have a great frame for that. And just help us talk about what ILEA means to you. And if you're not a member yet, we would love to have you join us, and we will pop that link over in our chat so you can find out more information about membership. Today, we are kicking off our first virtual program of the year. The ILEA year starts July 1, and we have some absolutely phenomenal programming for you all. Of course, today we're starting off with our Spotlight series, hearing from one of the pioneers of ILEA. We have a few different series coming up, the Maestros of Marquee Events, where there are several event producers from some of the biggest and largest events around the world that are going to join us. We have Crossroads of Creativity, where we have some great speakers coming from film and TV, theme parks, and sort of adjacent industries, if you will, that are going to talk about their creative process. We've got some of our partners coming online. We actually just announced a partnership with ADMEI, and they'll be coming online to talk with us. We'll also be doing some talks on our pillars, such as sustainability and wellness and D&I. And then last, we have some sessions on our ILEA core, just talking about membership, your membership benefits, how to apply for an Esprit Award, and also our CSE program. And these events are going to be both virtual. We have virtual coming nearly every month this year, and we also have some amazing live education coming. We've got IMAX right around the corner, live in Las Vegas. And of course, we've got TSE and Cater Source taking place in February in Austin, that we'll get to see you there. Today's session is presented by Comcast, and we're going to go ahead and hear a little bit from our sponsor.
Over the last decade, Comcast has reached 10 million people with the power of the internet through Internet Essentials.
10 years.
10 million people later.
Now, with Project Up, we're deepening our work and investing $1 billion over the next 10 years to help bridge the digital divide. We'll connect even more people to the internet, build digital skills, and empower the next generation of entrepreneurs. We've already launched over 1,000 Wi-Fi-enabled lift zones, partnered with thousands of community-based organizations, helped create a growing network of digital navigators, supported thousands of small businesses, and we're just getting started. Together, we can help build a future of unlimited possibilities.
One person,
one day, one dream at a time.
Awesome. A giant thank you to Comcast for sponsoring and Project Up. The last winner, Project Up, was actually an ILEA member. And here to tell us a little bit more about this and kick off our program officially is our International ILEA President, Gwen McNutt, CSEP.
I was trying to be good and stay on mute, and then I forgot to get off mute. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's really exciting for me to be able to speak with Dr. Goldblatt this morning, as well as be the sponsor for this session. Project Up is a program that started kind of during the pandemic. And one of those programs is called Comcast Rise. And that is a program that lifts up entrepreneurs. So BIPOC entrepreneurs, as well as women-led organizations. And I'm excited to say that one of our own ILEA members, is a Comcast Rise recipient. So that was really exciting for me. And if I can just shout her out, Sarah Cisna was a winner last year. So so happy to do that, and I'm excited to be able to talk to Dr. Goldblatt. So just wanted to welcome everyone. As Melissa said, I am Gwen McNutt, the current ILEA president, and I'm excited to be able to dip into some of the history. I have so much gratitude that Dr. Goldblatt has agreed to join us all the way from Scotland and tell us some of these wonderful stories that he has. Before we get started, I'm not going to read Dr. Goldblatt's bio, because you're going to learn a little bit more about him during our conversation. But I did want to just point out some really key things that should be noted, because he has so much history in the event industry, and it's just really important for us to know kind of like where our roots began. So he's the world's only professorial chair in planned event studies for 10 years at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, Scotland, and served as a teacher and researcher for 47 years. His first book was described by President Ronald Reagan's White House social secretary as a gift from the master. He is the author of the first textbook in the field of events management, and that has continuously been published for over 30 years. He's an author, co-author, editor of over 40 books and hundreds of articles in the fields of event management. Throughout his career, he produced events featuring notable people like President Ronald Reagan, Barbara Bush, Oprah Winfrey, and even Donald Trump. He was also the founding president of the International Special Events Society, what we now know as the International Live Events Association. And he was the developer of the original Certified Special Event Professional International Qualification Program. He is the first ever Lifetime Achievement Award winner for service to the industry for the International Special Events Society. Special Events magazine also awarded him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And if that wasn't enough, in 2019, the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce also bestowed on him a Lifetime Achievement Award. He lives in Edinburgh, Scotland with his wife, Nancy. He's the parents of Max and Sam, and the great-grandparents of Hamish and Guthrie. So Dr. Goldblatt, please welcome Dr. Goldblatt, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Madam President. And you know, you said that I'm coming all the way from Scotland. You're the one coming all the way from Chicago.
I guess that's true.
It's a pleasure to be with all of you.
Well, we're really excited for you to be joining us. And so I just want to start by sort of, setting the scene and the stage for where this all started, right? So it's 1987, and just so everyone can can visualize where we were, Microsoft Windows 2.0 operating system was just launched. Beverly Hills Cop 3 and Dirty Dancing were the most popular movies. Michael Douglas won Best Actor for Wall Street, and Cher Best Actress for Moonstruck. The very first Simpsons cartoon short was shown on the Tracy Ullman Show. And Rick Astley had the best-selling single of the year in the UK called Never Gonna Give You Up. So that's where we are. It's 1987. And so you had this idea to form an association with a group of like-minded professionals. So what brought it on? And can you tell me a little bit about, the players that were involved in creating this organization?
Well, thanks very much, Gwen. Unfortunately, I have to correct you. I didn't have the idea. The idea actually started on a bus, and the bus was heading towards, guess where? A party. We were all on a bus, 50 people, and Bob Graves, who was then the owner of one of the largest party rental companies near Philadelphia, and I sat on the very front seat because both of us tended to get little tummy sickness. And he turned to me and he said, you know, Joe, the only thing this organization is missing, the only thing is an association. You have a convention here at the special event at the Breakers Hotel, but you don't have an ongoing association. And I said, why do you suggest an association, Bob? There needs to be a place for education like we have with the American Rental Association. There needs to be a place for qualifications. There needs to be annual education, continuing professional development. And I said, well, Bob, how would we ever get something like that started? And he looked at me and he said, Joe, look behind you. There's 48 people behind us, and they're all following us, and we're all going in the right direction. And we were going towards ISIS and towards ILEA. So the idea was born with Bob Graves, who appointed me as his Jacob in the desert to lead us towards ISIS. However, there were dozens of hands that helped form and mold ISIS. They were the true founders. And these were leaders like Carol McKibben, who at that time was editor-in-chief of Special Events magazine and who was very, very supportive. And Michael and Julie Lotion, who owned a large catering and events business in Los Angeles. Joe Van Aaron, who owned the largest events business at that time, Celebrations in New York City. Mark Rose, an entertainment director, producer from Philadelphia. Alan and Judy Elias from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who owned a large catering rental company. Janet Lee, also from Minneapolis. Mary Ellen and David Schubert from Atlanta, Georgia. And Angelo Bonita, who was from Washington, D.C., as I was. So as you can see, there were lots of hands that came together. And we all agreed at the Breakers Resort in Florida to meet next year at the special event and to form an organizing committee. So in January 1988, Gwen, we met at the Fairmont Hotel. I had no idea how many people would show up. So I set the room for about 15 people. Well, we almost had to call the fire marshal. There were over 50 people trying to get into this very small room. And at that room, we decided that we would form an organization. I was appointed the interim president until we had formal elections. Mike Lotion was vice president, and so on. And then we agreed to meet that spring in Atlanta, Georgia. And because we had no money to start an association, I called a local hotel contact that I had, and I said, may I come in the day before and do a full day of training for your staff in events management in exchange for you providing 10 hotel rooms and catering for our board meeting? And they agreed. Oh, those were the days when there was lots of money flowing around in hotels. So we met in Atlanta, Georgia, and you may have heard of the name Vernon Jordan, the great civil rights leader. His mother was a wonderful caterer in Atlanta named Mary Jordan. And I went to her and I said, Mary, would you host the board dinner? We have no money. She said, do you mind eating in my kitchen? And I said, not at all. And we all met inside her kitchen, and she gave us the most gracious, delicious dinner ever. And her son, Windsor Jordan, who went on to run her catering business, was very active for many years in the events industry. So from that meeting, we actually held our first CPD, the Center for Professional Development. But in order to do that, we had to first bring everyone together to create the official beginning of the organization. And this was at the third special event conference at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles. And there I am holding the first of 150 membership certificates that were distributed that evening. Below my photograph, you see Jim Tunney. Jim was the NFL referee, he's now in his 90s, who gave our keynote speech at that meeting for about 200 people in the Westin Ballroom. And his speech was entitled, Building a Winning Team. And that's what we've been doing ever since, including with great captains like yourself and Melissa leading the current team. Then in the summer of 1989, we held our first meeting at professional development meeting at the Westin Peachtree Plaza Hotel. By now we had some money. We could afford a really first-class hotel in the center of Atlanta. And the people who attended this meeting were quite remarkable. We had about 300 people, but the speakers included the editor-in-chief of Brides Magazine, Barbara Tober, and the producers of the NFL Super Bowl halftime show and Olympic Festival, including Frank Sapovitz. Frank was a very young man in his late 20s, early 30s, and I remember somebody asking him during his presentation, what is the best way to begin an event? And he said something like, start big. And they said, well, do you mean with a half dozen violins playing at the door? And he said, no, 500 violins playing at the door. And I saw the eyes enlarge in that room. And I thought, that's what this organization is all about. It's about innovation, creativity, growing ideas. And so Frank went on to become director of special events for the National Hockey League and the National Football League. Our next milestone was in the mid-1990s when in Toronto, Canada, we held our first certified special event professional examination. The nerves were quite palpable, I remember, in that examination room, because these were the first people ever to be officially qualified in our industry. And along that same time, we began publishing books. There were 2 editions of ISIS Gold and 2 editions of the Dictionary of Event Management, which was co-edited by Carol McKibben and myself and others. And then the next stage in our development was our first international Center for Professional Development that was soon known as Event World. This was in 2002, where we celebrated our 15th anniversary in Sydney, Australia, and it was the first one to be held outside of North America in Sydney, Australia. And then just a few years later, 13 years later, we celebrated our 25th anniversary of ISIS at the Fairmont Hotel, the site of our original organizing meeting. And you see that I'm wearing a colorful waistcoat or vest, and that has flags sewn in, embroidered, of all of the ISIS chapters all over the world. So we grew from one organization to 30-some chapters all over the world. And then, of course, the question is, what's next? Well, I believe what's next, and we can talk about this in detail, is the further cultivation of a community of event professionals, because that's what our goal was from the very beginning, to create a community of event professionals to help one another through learning and through networking and through raising our standards of professionalism. And so I look forward not only to today, but also seeing all of you in person for our golden 50th anniversary, when I'll be in my mid-80s and I'll be looking forward to raising my glass to toast all of you in person. So that's how it all began.
Well, that is wonderful. And I have some follow-up questions about kind of every area that you discussed. So first of all, I want to talk about the first meeting. So what happened at the first meeting? You know, like what did you discuss? Like how did you make a plan for creating the association?
Well, here's what is really remarkable. You would have thought arch competitors at that time in a very small industry would come into a room and would immediately start vying for position, vying for control, vying for power. I'm sure others on the call who were in that room, including my friend Judy Elias, will agree it was just the opposite. We were all moving in the right direction. We looked around the table and we said, who's best to be the vice president? Well, that would be a lawyer, Michael Lotion, to keep us right legally. Who would be the best treasurer? Well, that would be an MBA, Mark Rose, and so on. And when we met in New York City to create the first code of ethics, which you still use today, we actually patterned our code of ethics upon 3 established professions: medicine, law, and accounting. So we aspired to be at the highest level of professional conduct. And as I've always said over the years, I believe an event manager is as important, if not more important, than a doctor, because who creates the conferences to train doctors? We do.
For sure. Well, and when you talked about the chapters and having chapters all over the world, so where did that idea come from? And where was the first chapter, and how did you guys get that developed and organized?
It came from one man again. His name was Bob Bargan, the late great Bob Bargan, who was from St. Louis, Missouri, and owned a entertainment company. At one of our board meetings, he said, all of the other industry associations have chapters, MPI, ASAE, and so on. Why not ISIS? Well, no one was willing to take this on. Bob raised his hand and said, leave it to me. And before you knew it, Philadelphia became our first chapter, Canada, our first international chapter, and then they spread all over the world very quickly. And of course, every time we opened a new chapter, the president, board members would go to wish them well. And I'll never forget in Indianapolis when they were talking about creating a chapter, but they weren't quite sure. They sent us in to try and sell them, to say, you really need to have a chapter in a big city like Indianapolis. Well, we were picked up at the airport by a very lovely limousine that one of the members had, and driven to the hotel. And we thought we did a great job, although I could see there were some dissenters. But I didn't realize how negative it was until they said, okay, we have the ride to take you back to the airport. And the only ride available was the back of a laundry truck. 4 of us got into a back of a truck with dirty laundry and rode all the way back to the airport. Well, we thought that's it. It's all over. Indianapolis became one of our biggest chapters.
This is true. So you also talked about the first conference. How did that come about? And then how were you surprised at how great the attendance was when you went there?
Well, you have to remember, as you were talking about all the other things that were going on in the world in the 1980s, this was the age of business events. This is when, if you asked a client, what is your budget, you insulted them. You never asked that question. Instead, you asked, tell me your dreams. Let me create your dreams for you. And then you listed 6 or 8 options in addition to that to offer them even more opportunity to celebrate. So the short answer is, at that time, there was such a demand for people to come together for learning in this wider industry of events management. The field of meeting planning focused primarily on content, right? Educational development and delivery, whereas events focused on things like, well, your maestro of marquee events. In Europe, the term marquee is the same word as tent in the United States. So we were teaching how to secure, erect, dress, create the health and safety for outdoor events, including massive tents, working with the Tent Rental Association at that time. So we were offering something that MPI, ASAE, and the other groups did not offer. And also, we were the first association in the world to invite everyone into our big tent. You didn't have to bring a meeting planner with you to join. You could join if you were a musician, a florist, a caterer, an event manager. It was really the first democratic, egalitarian organization in the world. And so with that joie de vivre, that spirit de corps, we had no trouble attracting members. In fact, the biggest problem we had was managing members and chapters because we grew so quickly, Gwen.
So now you're sort of moving, you've got 3-4 years under your belt. We're moving into the 90s. We're wearing our overalls, plaid pants, scrunchies, and acid wash jeans, of course. And you decide we got to raise the bar, right? Like we've created these chapters. We have a conference, but we really want to put more focus on education. You're a professor, obviously education is really important to you. How did you come up with the idea and the decision to create this program and launch it, and kind of what was the acceptance level amongst, the chapters and industry?
Well, I had been teaching, I think, my entire adult life. When I formed my company, the Wonder Company, I realized that there was a very, very poor level of training for event staff. So we created internal training programs from day one, and it really paid, because as a result, we went on to win awards, went on to grow bigger and bigger events, and it was all because it was rooted fundamentally in training and education. And so at that first organizational meeting in Atlanta, where we came together at that small hotel, I remember standing at a flip chart and writing on the flip chart the letters CSEP. I don't know where I came up with this title, Certified Special Events Professional, but it just came to me that we needed our own qualification. And soon the board agreed, but then it was put on pause for some time, because you can't do this on your own. You really need a serious university to put their imprimatur behind it. At 40 years of age, I returned to university, George Washington University, to earn my master's and doctorate. And for my doctoral dissertation, I wrote and conducted my research and study on professional certification programs in the event management field. And the dissertation was accepted by my doctoral committee, and I turned to ISIS and I said, would you now like to implement this? And they agreed. And that's where the CSEP came from that empirical research, basically comparing our industry to a half dozen other industries that had qualifications at that time. And what made the CSEP unique was that in addition to a multiple choice exam, which is how the SMP exam was administered, we added an essay part, which was a problem-solving blueprint that you had to solve event problems, and then it was read anonymously by other CSEPs or qualified event professionals. And I hope it's raised the bar. I believe it's raised the bar. I know that when I see job advertisements in the special events industry, many of them now say CSEP preferred or CSEP required. I think that speaks a lot about your industry.
Yeah, I think so too. And I took the exam. And just a side note for we'll get to this later about the celebration in Dallas, but we did when I think I can't remember what year it was. I actually think it was that year. I spoke at my very first conference, and you were in the front row, and I was shaking in my boots because I was
what do you think I was doing? I was shaking in my boots.
Because I was like, what in the world could I possibly tell the author of the book that I read to take this exam? So I was very nervous, but you were very gracious, and I appreciate that. So now I want to just roll on into the 2000s. There were a lot of big milestones in the 2000s. So milestone number one was the 15th anniversary of the association in 2002. So what did you guys do for that? And did you sit back and think, man, I can't believe that it's 15 years already?
Right. Well, it was 2012, and it was at the Fairmont Hotel in Dallas, Texas. And when we received the invitation from the ISIS headquarters, I think most of us who were past presidents were absolutely gobsmacked, as we say over here in Scotland, shocked that the time had flown so quickly. Then we were absolutely honored and flattered that we were all invited to attend. And thanks to Terry, who's one of your past presidents from Atlanta, all of us were invited to become honorary lifetime members of the association. That meant so much to us because, as you know, as you get older, Gwen, you lose so many of your friends and family due to illness, death, etc. And so that's actually started to happen now. But it's nice to know that those people who are no longer with us will always be members in spirit of our beloved association.
Absolutely. And along the milestone, that was the first year that the conference was hosted outside of or in 2002, the conference was hosted outside of the country in Sydney. And I had actually just become a member and I wanted to go so badly, but I worked for a nonprofit and that just was not going to happen. So when you decided to host it in Sydney, how did that come about and what was that like?
Well, we had two great leaders. We had Janet Landy, who was our international president at that time from Australia, from South Africa, Johannesburg. And we had a past president, Lena Malouf, who is from Sydney, Australia. And these two dynamic women really came together and produced, as only the Australians can do, the event of a lifetime. Do you know this event included yacht races in Sydney Harbor where we were racing against one another? It included an opening night reception with koala bears and indigenous people. It really was a remarkable event. And if you remember, Gwen, it was only a year after the tragedy of September the 11th, 2001. So there was a lot of question. Would anyone attend? Would anyone travel internationally? Is it appropriate to celebrate at all at this time? And we set aside those fears, and with confidence, about 200 people traveled to Australia, plus the members who were already there, and we had a very successful conference.
So you brought up something that I wanted to talk about, and that's kind of like not only the name change, but also stability and growth of the organization. So first, let's talk about, since you had mentioned it, our industry is continually shaped by world events. So things that are happening, I mean, you see it in events like, kind of like what's going on culturally kind of is reflected in the events that we throw, but it also has caused us to pivot. So in 2001 for September 11th, we had to pivot because of the industry was sort of shut down. And then of course, most recently, the global pandemic. So how have you seen, the industry and our association be shaped by these events that have occurred?
Well, we know, Gwen, that all economies are cyclical. They go up and down. When I started my business, we had a phenomenon called Black Monday when Wall Street literally closed, and we thought we were going to have to liquidate, our business. Within a few days, it had righted itself and things continued to grow again. Then we had the 2007-8 global financial crisis, which really stuck a very sharp knife in the heart of the live events industry. So these things are what I call natural and normal if you're a business owner or an event manager. But it does require people who are resilient, people who are anti-fragile, as Nicholas Taleb writes in his book of the same title. And I can't think of any human being on earth that has the perfect DNA to be resilient and anti-fragile and creative and innovative than event professionals. So we are perfectly positioned from our core to be able to bounce back. And as you know, after September the 11th, 2001, there was a very quick rebound. within a year, things were back to normal. The pandemic has brought us a different challenge. And it's also because in 2001, the internet was not as fully developed. We did not have social media as we do now. And so the fear factor was not as great as it is as a result of the pandemic. That said, we're now starting to see at festivals and other live events, attendance return to their pre-pandemic levels. Why? Because escapism is an absolutely essential need of every human being. We work so we can play. And that means the role of the event professional, in my view, is secure, as long as you say, they continue to pivot, to innovate, to grow.
Yeah. So speaking of growth, so in 2016, the organization changed its name from the International Special Events Society to the International Live Events Association, as it is now, and it was to reflect the growing and encompassing business of events was part of that. But how did the founders feel when that happened? Was there like, I don't really want to do this, I think it's a good idea, kind of like, what was the discussion amongst the leaders?
Well, you may find this surprising, but there was absolutely zero discussion among us. Why is that? Well, many had moved to different sectors of the industry. Others had moved, as I did, to education. We were no longer intimately, directly involved with the decision-making, and therefore it would be awkward, if not impossible, to offer a view. That said, I did write to the president at that time, and I reminded her the importance of branding and that it was important to consider this deeply in terms of the long-term ramifications for brands. However, the transition happened seamlessly and I think very effectively. And I think that's one of the keys of starting organizations. It's like raising children. My wife and I used to often say when we were in business, we had 3 children, Max, Sam, and Isis, or now ILEA. And ILEA will always be one of my children. But children only develop successfully if at some point you say, over to you. And that's what we've done with ILEA.
And we appreciate that. But I still want to get your comments on sustainability. Like what do you see as something that we need to do to be sustainable? And then what do you think the future holds for ILEA?
Well, membership is always the lifeblood of every association, right? And the key to attracting, recruiting, and keeping members to rise to become the next president of ILEA is relevance. ILEA and all associations have to offer services, products, values that are relevant to the present generation. And so, for example, this pivot that we've all made towards online events, right, is something that's worth cultivating and developing, because there's no guarantee we won't have another pandemic or that we won't continue to develop the online virtual world for more financial benefit for event professionals. Those who survived and have had the greatest success were those who were able to move into that sphere and to grow it and to charge for it, right? So I think the relevance of the products and services and values that the association offers is critical. And one of those key values is this debate we continually have even today about whether event professionals can charge for their time in creating proposals. I think ILEA could be a leader in setting a precedent for that, setting a guideline or a regulation or a value that the time of the event professional from the minute the mobile phone rings and the query is made to the end of the event when the evaluation is conducted, that time is valuable and it must be compensated for.
I agree. Lawyers charge for it.
Yes. Remember where our ethics came from? Medicine, accountants, lawyers, they all charge.
Yes, absolutely. So I have so I'm obviously new president. 2 months in, rose-colored glasses. So what advice can you give me as a new president about leading this organization?
Well, you heard my answer to you about ILEA and my hesitation to give any advice at all because I'm so far removed. But believe it or not, at 71 years of age, I'm chairman of the Interfaith Association of our city, the largest and oldest interfaith association in Scotland. I'm the incoming president of Volunteer Edinburgh, the largest volunteer organization, and I'm the vice chairman of the Shanghai, China Jewish Refugee Museum. So I hold 3 international leadership positions. This is what I've learned in stepping into these positions. Take time to meet with everyone on your board individually. Listen to their concerns, listen to their challenges, listen to their hopes, listen to their dreams, and then, and this is the important thing, Gwen, enlist their help. Even before you go into that meeting, have in the back of your mind where you are not as strong as you would like to be, and where someone on your board can improve the overall performance by taking responsibility for a subcommittee or some project, short-term project, etc. So engage them. And I also believe that extends to the members of ILEA. Engage them from the very beginning. With your membership campaign, instead of each one get one, why not each one get 21? Or have everyone take responsibility for getting members in this next year as part of the campaign to grow your membership. So I don't have any specific advice for you because I know how talented you are, but I will say this: you can't beat listening to others and then enlisting their help.
Absolutely, and I will heed that advice. But I want to say, if you were to talk to the young, idealistic Joe Jeff at the beginning, what would you tell him and his colleagues about starting this organization, and would you change anything?
Well, I think I would start by, as I've done with other projects I've created over the years, asking myself, what might this become? Be careful what you start. Now, pardon me, I get a little emotional because I had no idea that 40 years later, I'd have wonderful friends like Judy and her late husband, Alan, that Nancy and I would have friends in 64 countries all over the world where I've spoken about special events management. You really have to think, is this what you want to do as your life's vocation? Because these things have a way of developing and growing. And I'm just so grateful that I've been part of that growth and I'm still here to see it growing.
Awesome. So I have a couple more questions for you. And if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat so that we can ask Dr. Goldblatt. So along those same lines, what's one thing that you wish you would have known that you didn't?
Oh, I wish that I would have known how difficult it is to manage growth. Because as I said, in the 1980s, it was the boom time for corporate events. And so rather than saying, let's postpone granting more chapters for a couple of years, we just opened chapters right and left, and we didn't have sufficient professional staff to manage all of them. So a lot of this fell to the volunteers, etc. So I would hope that I would remember in my current role, leading organizations here in Scotland and in China, that you have to be very careful to grow incrementally. Don't be pressured by outside forces. Only grow to the extent that you can remain relevant and deliver the necessary services to your members. I guess that would be the main thing.
And what do you think sets ILEA apart from other associations?
Well, that's the easiest thing of all. When we started ISIS, which became ILEA, and you know, it's funny because we live in an age now of gender fluidity and gender identity. So it's perfectly natural for ISIS to become ILEA and maybe to change again, who knows? But the one thing that we learned is what sets the event manager apart from the traditional meeting planner, right? Whether it be a corporate or association meeting planner, or a recreation director who plans occasional events, etc., is the number of skills they must bring to every event. Now, they will not be an expert in all those skills, but they need to know how to find those people. And where is the single most effective place to look? The most efficient, expedient place to look? Well, it's ILEA. You go to the membership directory of ILEA because you'll find the authorities in 100+ different fields already with experience, expertise, and qualifications to support your event. So I think that's the difference, the complexity and the number of skills that are required to create, manage, and evaluate a successful professional event.
Absolutely. Well, we have our first question in the chat, which is from Donna Liston. And she says it's a three-parter. So the first is, when did a professional staff get hired? How many members were there at that time? And how did that conversation go?
Well, I'm going to do the first question. You'll have to remind me of the other two. We began immediately by hiring a professional staff person. We knew that all of us were small business owners. We had no time to manage an association, nor did we have the expertise. So at that very first meeting in Atlanta, 6 months after the original organizational meeting in Dallas, Texas, we brought 3 candidates. We had advertised, recruited, selected 3 final candidates, and we selected the one whose cultural background was most similar to us. He was an entrepreneur. He had run big association management companies, and now he was starting his own freelance company. And so we were very lucky to benefit for the first couple of years from his skills. So we did that immediately. What was the second question?
Second question was, how many members were there at that time?
Oh, when we met in Los Angeles, I recall that we had 150 certificates that were issued because I had to sign all of them as founding president. And so I think there was somewhere between 100 and 150. The way this organization got started in Dallas was I said it's going to take money to even register the association, have our first meeting. Here's my $100. And I put a $100 note on the table. And in those days, we used cash, believe it or not. Not everybody had credit cards. And the money came out, and we raised about $1,000 or $2,000, and the treasurer banked that, and we were off and running. And then we set our membership fees at that first meeting in Atlanta, which was, as you can tell, a very critical meeting where we elected the officers, etc. And we questioned, should we be at the price level of MPI, of ASAE? Should we be less, more? And through research, we came up with a number that was appropriate. And as a result, the checks began to fly in the door. So in a very short time, we were up to 100 members. And then, as I say, when we met in Los Angeles the following January, we had 150 members.
That's amazing. Well, the last part of her question was, how did the conversation of hiring a professional staff member go? But it seems like it went swimmingly.
Well, I think it was because we threw up our hands and said, we don't have the time, we don't have the expertise, we want this organization to be professional from the very beginning. And so we appointed someone who could be helpful to us. Now, that's not to say it was perfect, Gwen, or to Donna, who's asking the question. We had issues with staff throughout the years, but we were fortunate in being served by various association management companies who always had the best interests of ISIS at heart. And we were very lucky that everyone that worked with us was not only skilled, but they got the culture of this quite unusual organization. There's never been one like it.
Right. So we have another question from Kimberly Bone, CSEP, and it says, our biggest challenge at the chapter level is articulating value for membership. For me, it's community and opportunity, not straight line to business. How would you articulate the value of membership to a potential member?
Well, Kimberly, I do know that after September the 11th, 2001, when I returned to Washington, D.C. to earn my doctorate, I went to a local ISIS chapter meeting. It was heaving with people. Where we would normally have 100 people, there were 200 people. Now, this was at a time right after September the 11th, when the events industry was on its knees, right? There was no work coming in. And I turned to the president that time of the chapter, and I said, how did this happen? And she said, we're offering something the others are not offering. I said, what is it? Comfort. Wow. A place to talk, a place to share your concerns, a place to share dreams, a place to partner with others to grow your business even bigger. And so that chapter at that time grew as a result of that terrible tragedy. I do think, however, today the business world has changed dramatically since I owned a business for 20 years back in the 1980s and 90s, and that there is much more focus on the bottom line. And therefore, I think you have to find ways to offer a little bit of both. Because if you don't offer a little bit of both, the person who's authorizing the membership, who's usually the vice president or the owner of the company, they may question whether or not, compared to other organizations, this organization will produce a return on our investment. However, just as events can't solely be measured in economic impact, neither can memberships. So I think you need to upplay the role of networking, education, support, and downplay the immediate economic return. And fact is, with any association, if you don't show up, Gwen, you don't grow up. Isn't that right?
That is true.
So you can't expect the association to simply forward business to you. I have one funny thing that happened. My second year of president of ISIS, I received a call from an irate lighting equipment company owner. He said, you're doing an event and you used another lighting company. I'm an ISIS member. How come you didn't hire me? That's why I joined the association. Well, I'm old-fashioned. In those days, you could drive over and talk to the man face to face. I went right over to his counter. I leaned across the counter and I said, every event requires the best candidate, the best service, the best product for that particular event. And in this case, there's somebody in New York that has different equipment that we needed. That doesn't mean the next case, it might not be you. But don't ever think for a minute, by simply joining an association, we've granted you the right to inherit all the business from all of us. You have to earn it. And so we became great friends over the years.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to say, thank you for sharing your wonderful stories with us, your time, and obviously your knowledge and history of the association. Everyone, thank you for tuning in to this conversation. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate you being here. Did you have any final thoughts that you want to share, Dr. Goldblatt?
I just wanted to say, and I should have begun with this, none of this would have been possible without the love and support of my partner in crime, my beautiful wife of nearly 50 years, Nancy. All of those times when Alan and I and others got on an airplane to go to some strange town to develop ISIS chapters and left Judy, and Nancy, and all of our other partners behind so that we could grow this industry. We should never forget our loved ones who sacrificed so much so that we could have this program and this association today. So our eternal gratitude goes to all of them. And as I said at the beginning, Gwen, I have every intention of raising my glass to all of you at the 50th anniversary of ISIS. When we had the 25th, I said, I'll see you at the 50th. It's not that far away. So, Salan Java, which in Gaelic means to your good health, and Salan Javor, which means to your great health. I'll see you in a few years.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We'll be seeing you soon with the next chat.